Hey guys, it's Aaron, or LM9, and today I'll be showing you guys how I sculpt Mandalorian armor. Now, in this video, I'll be walking you guys through how I sculpt the chest armor for Din Djarin's Beskar chest armor. Now, sculpting is something that most people aren't automatically good at. It takes a lot of practice. I've been sculpting parts for my LEGO figures for about 5 years now, and when I started off, I was not good at it at all. But I think I have drastically improved since then, and I have plenty of room to still improve further. Now, since sculpting in general just isn't an easy topic to explain exactly how to do, this video is going to be mainly focusing on tips and strategies I follow when sculpting armor pieces, not just like an exact procedure on how to make something specifically. So as I said, I'll be making a torso armor sculpt for Din Djarin, aka the Mandalorian. As for supplies, here's what I'll be using. I'm using a base torso, some sculpting putty, and that is the brand Procreate, an X-Acto knife, other various sculpting tools like a wooden spatula or some picks, sanding materials like sanding sticks at various grits, super glue, and a cup of water. Now, if you're new to sculpting, I'll give you guys a brief rundown on some sculpting basics. Firstly is the material. Now, Procreate is a sculpting putty I absolutely love using because it's pretty easy to work with and has an air-dry curing time of about a few hours. There are other putties like Green Stuff that are pretty similar, but Green Stuff is a little sticky in consistency, so I wasn't a huge fan of that personally. I would highly recommend picking an air-dry putty like Procreate or Green Stuff and avoid oven-baked clays like Sculpey. Because if you're sculpting on a Lego, you can't stick a plastic part into the oven because it will absolutely melt. So just pick a putty that works best for you. Secondly, one thing putty likes to do is cling to your tools. Just a small tip that you can do is just wet your tools just a little bit with water or even chapstick even. You don't need to drench it completely, but just introduce a little moisture onto your tools or whatever surface you're trying to prevent the putty from sticking to. So if your tools are wet, you can easily cut through your putty and add details. Just be cautious. You do not want the surface you're applying the putty to be wet, or else your putty just will not stick at all. So just be cautious of that. Another tip is to settle on a style. Sculpting styles vary from just simple, minimal sculpts like the collar and vest on this Han Solo figure by Tossie Figs, a more detail-focused sculpting style like this Clone Trooper by Sander or the Mythosaur, or maybe something in between, which is where I usually operate. It's all a matter of personal preference, but if you're a beginner, I highly recommend starting simple and working your way up from there. Planning is also a very, very important step. You want to have some sort of idea of how you want your sculpt to look when it's done and just plan out the whole sculpt from start to finish. So let's go ahead and get to work. For Mando's chest piece, I can tell he's going to have at least 4 major areas to sculpt all on their own. I'm not going to do this all at once. I'm going to work in layers. Working in layers is something absolutely vital when sculpting at this scale, at least I think personally. Oftentimes, people will try to do everything all at once when they're sculpting, and more often than not, their sculpts will look very rushed, details will be very messy and soft, and the edges will be soft instead of being crisp. So I can't stress this enough. Work in layers and take your time. Now with Mando, the first layer I'm going to do is his ab armor. I'm going to mix together a small amount of Procreate and put it in the general area on the torso. Now using the wooden spatula, I'm going to flatten out this piece so it's pretty thin. Then using the X-Acto knife, I'm going to cut away at the excess putty and start to straighten out the edges of the armor using the side of the X-Acto blade. This armor is angled on the sides, so I'm going to gently press down at an angle on the sides of this armor piece onto the putty and get the right shape. This is going to take a lot of trial and error, but eventually I landed on a good shape. After doing this, I straightened out all of the edges on the armor so everything looks nice and crisp. So I'm going to go ahead and let that cure for a few hours. While this piece is drying, I'm going to introduce a sculpting method called dry sculpting. For the centerpiece of the chest, I want a raised backing. So what I'm going to do is roughly sculpt the general shape of the backing on a piece of fodder plastic, such as the lid to my putty container. So this general shape does not need to look great right now. Once it's dry, I'm going to sand it down and carve out the edges of the correct shape with my knife. Now, this dry sculpting strategy can be used to get really crisp edges on armor pieces or just pieces of sculpt in general. And it can be used to create like rods of varying sizes and much, much more. So dry sculpting just means that you are sculpting when the material is dry. So you're just going to get these really nice, crisp cuts and edges. So going back to the torso, I'm going to sand that ab armor so it's smooth, and then I'm going to glue on the dry sculpted piece. So do any additional sanding or reshaping if you feel the need to. I'm going to do a little bit of sanding here to get these two relatively level. The next piece I'm going to focus on is the centerpiece. Now, I want to do this first after the ab armor because it's going to act as like a center point or a point of reference for symmetry on the chest armor. So apply some Procreate and manipulate it to a thin, narrow diamond using the X-Acto knife. This way you'll get some sharp edges. Then using one of your sculpting picks, bevel in the very center of it. So once you're happy with the shape, go ahead and let that cure for a couple hours. The next two pieces are the chest plates. I'm only going to do one at a time here just because I don't want to rush this sculpt. And to make it even more confusing, what I'm planning on doing is to make each plate in two separate parts. That main chest plate and then the little angle section on the side that goes over the abs. So you might be able to knock it out in one layer if you want to, but I'm just going to take my time and just do them separately and see how it goes. So here's what the first layer looked like. So I'm going to go ahead and let that fully cure. Once that is cured, sculpt the remaining section, have it overlap that ab armor, and repeat the same process on the other side and make sure you get them as symmetrical as possible. After you get these sections sculpted, give it a once-over with a high grit sanding material to smooth everything out. Now you are essentially done with your torso sculpt for the Mandalorian. For other armor types, the process is going to be fairly similar, but the most important things to remember from this video are to take your time and to work in layers. You do not need to crank everything out in one sitting in one layer when you're sculpting. These tips are applicable for every piece of armor I sculpt: helmets, gauntlets, shoulders, legs, all of it. Just be patient and practice. If you don't think you're good right off the bat, don't be discouraged. Just keep trying and you will definitely improve. I know from experience that is exactly what happened to me. So hopefully you guys found this tutorial helpful. Just let me know down in the comments if you guys have any questions or struggling with anything or have any other suggestions for more tutorials. I'm always open to more ideas. But if after watching this you guys find yourself really not wanting to sculpt, I do have quite a few Mando armor casts available for pre-order on swfanatics.com right now, and I will be having more pre-orders for this Beskar Mando armor up soon once it gets casted in resin, as well as casts of my General Grievous kits. So stay tuned. I'll be updating you guys so you don't have to keep asking on the community tab when they're coming, because I will let you guys know when they're coming. I'll probably post a video about the Grievous because he's a big deal. Anyway, that is going to be it, guys. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys later.